Hi everyone, I'm John Rennie from Boneyard Pictures. Thanks for joining me. Lately, I've been on a bit of a Frankenstein kick. I recently reread the classic Mary Shelly novel, and that, combined with a video I posted about the season 5 James Whale-inspired episode of The X-Files, the Post Modern Prometheus, which I'll link below, led me to watching the hammer-horror Frankenstein cycle that started with the classic pairing of Peter Cushing as the Baron and Christopher Lee as the monster in The Curse of Frankenstein, which was Hammer's first film to be released in stunning colour in 1957.
You shoot well. I've done what had to be done.
Hammer's Frankenstein cycle would become a staple for the studio, and ended up lasting for a run of 7 films, including such classics as Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed, which is today considered by many as a stone-cold classic.
It seemed that when we saw Curse of Frankenstein, there was a graphic quality to it that was totally uncalled for, which made it extremely endearing to us. We enjoyed it a great deal.
This episode, it is the end of the cycle that I want to take a look at. So join me as we look at the production and critical reception of the 1974 bold, gory, star-studded and beautiful-looking film, Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell. Growing up, as with many horror fans, Hammer films played a huge part in my life. I have vivid memories staying up well past midnight in my bedroom with my first TV, which was a black and white portable set, watching hours of late-night Hammer horror, falling asleep in class the next day because I've been awake all night watching Hammer's The Mummy or The Abominable Snowman, and of course the classic Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing Dracula movies. But as a young kid, it was always the Frankenstein movies which I adored the most.
Where did it all begin? I suppose it was when I was a boy at school. I always had a brilliant intellect.
As I grew up into a teenager, it would be the Dracula series and the more titillating films, such as Countess Dracula or The Vampire Lovers, that I would watch more often, but that's a whole other story for another video.
Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the most terrifying of them all?
Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell marked the final installment in the Hammer Films Frankenstein series. The screenplay was penned by Anthony Hines, the son of Hammer Studios founder William Hines, under the pseudonym John Elder, which he had used as his screen credit for his Hammer screenplays ever since first writing The Curse of the Werewolf for the studio in 1961.
The full moon that turned an innocent man into a savage beast.
As an interesting side note, the name of Hammer Studios comes from the founder William Hines' stage name. He used the name Will Hammer as an actor, which he took from his birthplace in Hammersmith in London. Not only was The Monster from Hell the final Frankenstein for Hammer, but also it marked the end of an era. Hammer was founded by Hines in the 1930s and produced all kinds of work, from American-funded action flicks, light-hearted musical comedies such as Sporting Love in 1936. And for me, the most important early work from the studio was the spooky chiller, The Mystery of the Mary Celeste, also known as Phantom Ship, starring Bela Lugosi, made in 1934. But it wasn't until the mid-1950s that Hammer horror, as we came to know and love it, would be born, with a collaboration with Nigel Neal on the screenplay The Quatermass Experiment, which was a film version produced by Hammer of the 1953 TV serial The Quatermass Experiment, starring actor Reginald Tate as Professor Bernard Quatermass.
I've always been secretly afraid that sometimes something would happen that we couldn't deal with.
Producer Anthony Hines had seen the series on television and contacted the BBC and bought the rights immediately to be made into a film by Hammer. It was the success of this series which prompted Hammer to concentrate on the sci-fi and horror genre, and a legend was born.
You've destroyed him like you've destroyed everything else you've touched, Ken.
There's no room for personal feelings in science, Judith.
Skip forward a few years to 1957, and director Terence Fisher, who had become known as somewhat of an auteur filmmaker by horror fans due to his relationship with Hammer Studios, quickly and skillfully directed the films The Curse of Frankenstein, followed by Hammer's horror of Dracula, which was advertised with a now classic ad campaign of a huge billboard atop the Gaumont Haymarket Theatre in London. These movies were huge commercial hits, and this led to a slew of films made by Hammer, written by Jimmy Sangster and directed by Terence Fisher, with what will become known as his signature stylistic approach of atmospheric gothic horror.
Got it. Give us a hand.
In Hammer's later works, the gothic style would be combined with sexy costumes, a risky nudity and more blood and gore as times moved on into the 1960s, as they aimed their work towards a younger, swinging 60s audience. By the beginning of the 1970s, fans of the genre were looking for something more than what Hammer were producing in the late 50s and throughout the 1960s. The gothic style of horror that Fisher had helped to create was now replaced by modern psycho thrillers, such as Hammer's Fear in the Night and Straight On Till Morning, a great claustrophobic and terrifying story of obsession.
I love you.
A love story from Hammer that takes you straight on and into a strange world of extraordinary pathos.
Fisher had been a great asset to the company, and unfortunately had missed out on directing a few projects, including the horror of Frankenstein, for which writer Jimmy Sangster stepped into the director's chair. And due to his ailing health and 2 car crashes, which resulted in not one, but both of Fisher's legs being broken in separate incidents, he was forced to take a break from directing for a good few years. But now Fisher was in his late 60s, and it was younger directors, and films like The Exorcist, directed by 38-year-old Oscar-winning William Friedkin, that audiences were wanting to see. But Hammer producer Roy Skeggs was adamant that Fisher be brought back into the fold to direct Hammer's next production, Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell. Hammer was flagging now in terms of sales. The Monster from Hell was intentionally conceived by the studio as a throwback to its previous gothic horror successes, so it made perfect sense to bring back Fisher, who was the director who had helped to start it all in 1957 with The Curse of Frankenstein. This is perhaps why The Monster from Hell seems to me to have a nostalgic feel to it. There are many references to Hammer's previous Frankenstein films, such as the famous eyes moving in the jar scene, and the slight tip of the hat to the famous James Whale 1931 version of Frankenstein, as Cushing is introduced in The Monster from Hell almost identically to the way that the monster is revealed in Whale's film.
Doctor.
Was Fisher trying to tell us that finally Frankenstein himself had become the monster? A great little touch to the style of the film, and a tip of the hat to Frankenstein lore, which I thought was really cool in this work.
Oh, it's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Paul, it's alive. Paul, we've done it!
I think what Hammer tried to do with The Monster from Hell was show the audience more gore in order to gross them out rather than terrify them. And for me, that was quite a shock as a kid because I wasn't used to it. This Frankenstein is quite a gory film, even for Hammer.
Do you think that color would suit our friend?
With the camera lingering on animal brains, which were used as the human brains in the movie, and the creepiest moment is when the Baron clamps an artery with his teeth in one scene, as he's unable to use his hands because of the previous lore of the series when he was burned in a fire and Frankenstein must be destroyed.
I can't reach the vein and hold the artery at the same time. Damn these hands.
This could perhaps also be the reason for the Baron's beautiful hairpiece in the film. But that's just a bit of fan theorizing. Maybe Cushing just liked it as he'd worn it in previous films. But this moment of gore and using his teeth is a perfect moment for the character, but my gosh, what a gross out moment. What Fisher does do in this film is show us that he is an accomplished director, The Monster from Hell would be Fisher's last film, and it is a great swan song for not just the Frankenstein character, but also the end of an accomplished career. Fisher uses the excellent sets by the great art director Scott McGregor to his advantage, and the film feels claustrophobic as it almost never leaves the lunatic asylum in which it all takes place. And in one shot in particular, the set is used as a fantastic metaphor for the barren situation as the camera pulls back to reveal that he himself is a prisoner of his own ideas and just as much an inmate of the asylum as his patients.
No matter, there's plenty of time to decide that. Plenty of time.
A great and wonderful piece of visual storytelling from a director who by this point in his career, near the very end, shows us that he was a master journeyman filmmaker. There are a few moments in the film that show its age now, and also its low budget constraints. In the opening and ending shots of the film, we clearly see a model of the city and a matte painting behind it, and parts of the model are out of scale. But this was part of Hammer's signature by this time. And if you give yourself over to the movie, this really isn't a problem and adds to the charm of the film, I think, as we can see the craftsmanship that went into it.
You're very observant.
Nothing is wasted, and every skill and technical tool is used to tell an engrossing story. And this is what Hammer was really good at. Before the gore, it was all about telling great stories.
Because he fears me. Why should he? I kept him alive when he wished to die. That is why, Simon.
The one big letdown of the show is the monster's makeup itself. The monster was played by David Prowse of Star Wars fame, and is the only actor to have played the monster twice, returning from playing the role of another doomed experiment in the previous The Horror of Frankenstein. But the suit is clearly hardened plastic in The Monster from Hell, but Prowse's eyes say so much about the monster's hurt, anger, emotional turmoil and confusion. And that, for me, really helps to sell the movie, and despite the cheap look of the monster, it still makes for a great and often grisly visual experience in horror. And on a personal note, this was the only Hammer monster to ever give me nightmares when I was a kid. And I guess this is what makes me look back fondly on this film. It did its job, scared me and kept me awake until I was sleeping with my head on my desk in class the next morning. The performances in the movie also have to be mentioned. The return of Cushing as the Baron really makes the movie.
Yes, it does make a difference.
I'm glad you agree with me.
Cushing was terribly thin at the time, and he was grieving for his recently departed wife. And I think you can see that he threw himself into the role. And I think he gives his most menacing turn as the Baron in The Monster from Hell. There are a few moments when he is genuinely terrifying.
Don't do anything stupid, will you? I'm sure you won't.
The cast all give great performances with returning Hammer regulars. Actor Shane Bryant, who had previously done Straight On Till Morning, stars here as the Baron's apprentice.
I'll do my best.
You will do it correctly. Now come on now.
And Madeleine Smith makes another Hammer appearance after her work in The Vampire Lovers in the role of Sarah, who remains mostly mute for the film, again seeing a lot with her eyes, but has many secrets to tell. And of course, there is a wonderful supporting cast of British stage actors and film stars.
I created man in my own image.
To round out the inmates that helped to give a masterful send-off to Terence Fisher as a Hammer auteur. He couldn't have asked for a better cast of fine performers in his last Hammer horror.
I must admit, I've never felt so elated in my life, not since I first... That was a long time ago.
Upon its release, critical reception for Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell was mixed. Some critics appreciated the film as a return back to what Hammer did best, and enjoyed this gruesome and gothic tale in the Hammer tradition, while others saw it as a rehash of what Fisher had done in the past, and was now almost a pastiche.
His final film for Hammer, Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell, was not one of his best, but it's nevertheless a fitting tribute to a singular genre of British film. But one couldn't help but gain the impression that this was not only the end of the road for Terence Fisher and Baron Frankenstein, but for Hammer horror also.
Nevertheless, The movie garnered a cult following with many Hammer horror film fans like myself who appreciate Cushing's return to the role after being absent from the horror of Frankenstein, and of course from a filmmaking standpoint, the film is a piece of horror history, becoming one of Hammer's final films and Fisher's last turn as a Hammer filmmaker.
I'm surprised by the cult following, but I'm delighted by it. But then, if you look at classical music, people will continue to play Handel till the end of the world. In musical terms, this is a genre of cinema which will live forever.
What most critics noted was the presence of the increased violence and gore in the film, which some received negatively, wanting to see the horror in the more stylistic approach that Hammer had taken in the past, leaving the violence and gore to play out in the audience's mind where it belongs.
Silence!
Watching the film again, and it has been a few years since I last saw it, I think it stands out as one of the best Frankenstein films, to explore the themes of the Baron's madness and the way the character has progressed over the years, believing that he has been pushing the boundaries of science. Unlike the earlier films, which focused on the moral dilemmas of creating life.
We've discovered the source of life itself, and we've used it to restore a creature that was dead. Now, this is a tremendous discovery, but we mustn't share it yet.
Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell seems to paint the Baron as finally having gone over the edge.
The creature's dead, destroyed.
Well, that's of no importance. Best thing that could have happened to him.
It's not about science anymore. It's about him becoming the creator of man.
Now, do as I tell you and practice.
And proving to everyone that he is indeed the greatest doctor, or I think, the most insane doctor there ever was.
To Baron Frankenstein, creator of man. That man in there didn't exist till you created him. One man's body, another man's mind.
Creator of man.
It's quite a fitting end to the character, and in a way he does get his comeuppance for his past crimes. His pursuit of his own egotistical scientific goals have led the Baron to the only logical conclusion, and he ends as just another inmate in the asylum, and has finally become the monster inside the cage.
Go back to your rooms. There's nothing more for you to see. It's all over now.
I hope you enjoyed my take on Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell. If you would like to see more from me about Hammer's other work and other movies, please remember to like and subscribe. Leave your thoughts on this classic series in the comments below. And as always, thank you all so much for listening.